Entrepreneurs on born that brew. You are now listening to the Entrepreneur Podcast with your host, Adam McChesney. Let's grow!
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Adam McChesney, and I want to thank you for being here. If you're listening, please be sure to subscribe to the show and leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. We would love for you to share this on social media by tagging me and our guests. In this way, we can get this content out to more people. Today, we have a first, at least the first that I know of. We have an ex-pro athlete here today. Today's guest is a retired NFL player. He has been featured in major media outlets like Sirius XM Radio, ESPN, Fox Sports, CBS, and much more. He has spent time with some of the world's top performers in both sports and business. My guest today is Taylor Symmank. He is a sales rep at Apex Business Association. And Apex is where the two of us met and where I've been a member of the community now for 3 years. Taylor, welcome to the show.
What's going on, my man? It's a pleasure.
Yeah, man. Excited. Did I screw up the name? I feel like I screwed it up.
No, you crushed it.
Okay. All right.
Hey, trust me, I've had worse. I had in college, like on the intercom during my whole first year being completely wrong. So
yeah, well, that makes me feel a little bit better. I always second guess, did I say it right? And then I try to finish out the introduction and all that stuff. But man, super pumped. I know you and I, we've been connected online for a while. I met you in person at the last Apex Live briefly as we were all running around and things like that. But super excited to dive into your story. Obviously I know a lot about it from a distance, right? But would love to kind of have you dive in first and foremost. I think the pro athlete to the life after professional sports is something I think a lot of people are interested in. So kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you're at today.
Yeah, man. So kind of, I guess I'll make a quick recap on where I got to in business, because we'll move to after sports. But yeah, I grew up in sports for the early part of my life. My grandfather coached for the Cowboys back in the day with Tom Landry. He's in the Coaches Hall of Fame. He's a strength coach, won a Super Bowl. So that was kind of like my upbringing. I was working out with him and a lot of my cousins and some of the guys he trained on his workout programs at like 13. Just that was just kind of the space I was in, the environment. And then as I continued to progress and things like that, it's actually a funny story. I ended up kicking and punting. Like that was my thing later. Mm-hmm. However, I wanted to play receiver. Like that was my main position. I just was 5'10", 160, white, and not fast at the time, right? So I was just like, we'll have to make something work. And then in college, I was pissed because I got to like 6'3", 195, and ran a 4.4 on pro day. I was like, okay, I could have used this like 5 years ago. What the heck was this? Yeah. But point being is I always thought like kickers and punters were like soft. I was just like, man, they're so gay. Like I'm not going to be that guy, and ended up like I just happened to do that. So it's just funny, a small circle. But point being, I grew up playing sports in that area. And learned a ton, which we'll probably get into a little bit more, I imagine. And as I transitioned into business, it was a hard that first year out was kind of a struggle, really, because you have like this identity crisis, if you will, of like, I've been this thing for 27, 28 years at the time. And I was like, all right, start over, go do something else. And you got to start at the bottom again. And so I learned like a lot of things transferred over into business, which actually helped me a lot, which was a fun process and a brutal process at the same time. But yeah, that's kind of how it all started, to be honest, in the recap.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you recapping that. And yeah, we'll definitely dive into some of that stuff deeper on in this episode. But I love kind of like what you talked about, though, just about like how the family environment was kind of like your first introduction into probably, obviously, what was a luxury at the time. Just the fact of like most kids growing up don't see that side of like the professional world and getting those connections and things like that. So I would love to, whether it's, obviously being in Apex now and being around Ryan and all these amazing people, or being around professional athletes, or being around a family environment. Talk to us a little bit about like what community in your environment has just done for everything inside and outside of sports.
Literally, it's everything. Honestly, I mean, because I think back to, because once I got done playing, like when I started transitioning into business, I was like, man, like what made me successful? Like what allowed me to be, the top 1% and what I did. And because that's at that point, you're like, how do I make this work over here now? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to realize that I didn't realize, because when you grow up in it, you don't like correlate it all as being like a necessary piece to what got you to where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started looking back over it, and then the teams I was with and the coaches and like certain people I put in my life over time, I was like, oh my goodness, the culture, the environment, the people. I mean, it's the cliche thing. It's like the 5 people you hang around and become, the 6th or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a real thing. And so being around the right environment, that's actually what got me to Apex and looking around. I got connected with Ryan through Ed Milet, actually. And I was talking to him. I was getting done. I was in insurance at the time. And I was like, man, I just want to get around people that are winning. Like when I used to walk into locker rooms of different teams, I'd like, who's the guys that have been here for a long time? Who's the guys that are probably going to be Hall of Famers or Pro Bowl guys last year? What are they doing? Like, how are they recovering their body? Like, what are they doing on the weekends? What are they doing after practice? Are they in the same film? Like, I'm trying to emulate the guys that have been there and done it and have done it for a long time.
Yep.
So like the top 1% of the 1%, essentially. And so in business, I try to do the same thing, which goes back to like, I'm getting and immersing myself in an environment to where I have to be the next one that becomes part of that tribe, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I would say it's everything, man.
Yeah. No, I love, I mean, I always say like success leaves clues, another cliche thing, but like what you just said is you're like, I'm going in rooms and I'm being very specific about who I'm watching. I'm not just watching what they're doing in the moment. I'm watching what they're doing when people aren't looking and when basically it doesn't really matter, right? It's the behind the scenes of even just the practice. And I think that's where most people fall short. They'll take a look at someone super successful and they'll say, what is that person doing in this moment? Thinking that the moment in and of itself is all of the work that goes into it, when it's like literally the fraction of it, right? So really intrigued by hearing that, because I do like I played college soccer, right, just at the NAIA level, but yeah. I was never the fastest player. I was never the strongest. I was never the quickest. I was always like the stocky, kid a little bit, right? But like I was always seeing a couple plays ahead, because that was like really my only ability to like get above and beyond where I was at, especially at the collegiate level, of just being able to see like, okay, the ball's there, but I know where it's going to come, and I just need to be in a position to put myself to be successful. And I think that's where like the winners truly win. Talent and talent alone only does so much.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's that Wayne Gretzky quote? It's about like the anticipation part. I forget off the top of my head, but it's exactly what you just said.
Yeah. I was thinking about that in another quote, but I don't want to butcher him and sound completely stupid, but no, that's what I was going for. And it's how it's really served me as well, which it sounds like it has for you too, which is great. So you mentioned, getting into insurance after that. So what was the transition like after being a professional athlete?
Yeah, so there was fun parts, and then there was also parts that were really hard. The hard parts were you do something for so long and you become really good at it, and then someone's like, hey, like you have to stop that career, and you're over. Well, granted, mine was a hip injury, so I was a kicker and punter, I had a hip flexor, kind of a big deal in what I was doing, and then the timing was just off, and so I was like, hey, it's time to transition, and I always wanted to get into business anyway, and so after about like 4 years, I was like, okay, cool, like this is the moment to take it. So that transition, you do something for almost all of your life and train for something. And then it's like, hey, cool, now you need to restart. And you don't really, you get some like, oh, cool, you're a professional athlete, like it can help you in business. But in reality, it's like you do start from the bottom again. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of like the thing. It's like, oh my goodness, like everybody's asking me questions like, hey, like ask me about football. I'm like, I'm trying to recreate myself again here now, and like being pulled back into that, which was always great. I love that stuff. Like, don't get me wrong. But internally I was like, okay, like I want you to know me for this new thing now. So let me go create this. And we're talking about this now. And this is something else we talk about too. And so that was a hard process, because you have all your buddies and friends like, hey, you still free agent, the team's gonna pick you up, and you're like, yeah, I love that. Like it's always pulling at me already. Like it's something I don't want to do. So then every time someone says something, I'm like, well, yeah, I would love to, that kind of deal.
Yeah.
So that transition was hard, but at the same time, it was cool because as that process happened, I started to see the correlations of like the things that innately as athletes, you just do because it's part of the game. It's part of the process. Like you just adapt and learn, and you develop skills that are you have to have them in order to be good. And you don't realize those are like unique pieces that kind of separate you from everybody else in all areas of their life. So especially in business, you're like, oh, like that's just kind of what I do. And you're like, not everybody else does that. And I'm like, oh, well, all my buddies, we used to just have to do that. It was part of the thing, right?
Yep.
And so like you realize those little things that separate you, and they're so ingrained that you really can't get them out. And it actually is a thing that helps you. So that was the fun part, to like discover some of those things. I'm like, oh, cool. Like I'm actually not as far behind as I thought. Because that's what I used to think. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm like in the running a mile and only finished one lap. I got 3 laps to catch up to everybody. Because I'm already older than most people that are coming into it, right? It's just, that part was a struggle, but a fun too, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I can see that, right? And the reason why I asked that question is not just to get the information about it, but I think a lot of times people will hang on, whether it's a sports career or they will hang on to a business, and a business might have failed, or they are willing to run that business into the ground just out of spite of their ego or anything else of like, I don't want to fail. I don't want to pivot. I don't want to look like a failure. But if you come to the realization that it just might be that time to make the pivot in business, to shut down the business and start something new, or to sell your business or whatever it might be, you don't have to hang on to that identity. Not that you don't want to take things that you've learned and really own what that experience was for you and who you were at that time. But if you don't also do what you just mentioned and like form that new identity and be very, very intentional about it, I think that's where most people go wrong, and they spend too much time. Like they will run something into the ground and then fail, instead of just being like, hey, this isn't going to work. I'm just going to pivot right now.
100%. And it is, once that shift happens, right, then you start, your mind's like the RAS, basically reticular activating system, starts to correlate all those things back to, okay, cool, that moves the right way. But we have to make that decision. Sometimes it's, in life, most of the times it's the simple things that we have to do, we make really complex. Yeah. And then once we make the decision, everything kind of falls in place.
Yep.
Similar to that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know obviously right now you're focused on, Apex and being a sales rep there. Are there any things outside of Apex, or is there any like other ventures that you're a part of, like whether it's real estate? Again, I have no idea, but is there anything else that you're doing as well from like an entrepreneurial set of things?
Yeah, for sure. So I've got a lot of investments and stuff like that I have. I train kids and stuff like that on the weekend just to keep me in the game. That's a little business I have there. It's fun to do that. And then also just a couple other things with other companies and buddies. Like it's more of an investment, but just knowledge and stuff like that, helping them from percentages of what I do there. So a couple of different things. That's the fun part. It's like always something new. But yeah, that's kind of the main focus obviously is Apex, but those things were in place before I even got into Apex and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely other things, and constantly looking to invest and, multiply the money that I have or I make and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I love that. Love that, man. And one of the reasons why I asked that question as well is because I think, I have quite a few people that listen to this podcast that want to start their own business, but a lot of people, I came from a medical sales background. So a lot of people are sales reps that listen to this podcast, as well as obviously entrepreneurs. But a lot of people are like, hey, Adam, I don't know how to make that pivot, make that transition, do all of those things. So that's a question, obviously, as you kind of have done or experienced a little bit of both. But more importantly is, how does a sales rep have an entrepreneurial mindset? Obviously most sales rep positions are uncapped, so it's kind of like you're running your own business within the business. How can people truly understand that they are an entrepreneur right now, an intrapreneur of sorts, but to hone in on those things to get to a point where, eventually, if you do want to start your own business, you need to be taking advantage of the resources that you have right now?
100%. And I think a lot of times in that space, most people don't understand, especially when they're early on the entrepreneur side, they don't understand how hard it is to do it on your own strictly, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so when you're an intrapreneur, let's just call it, like understanding the gift of that is huge, because you're having a lot of the risks and the factors that you don't really maybe fully know about yet either, that are kind of covered for you to some extent. And then from inside, you get to develop all those things. So if you ever did something, you at least have those skills that would allow you to do that. And then you're going to have to face all those other things you really didn't know about yet. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in that space, it's treated like it is a business. And then as you get better at those things that are basically some of the things that are covered for you, when you get really good at the things that aren't, then when that time comes to where you're like, hey, cool, I just want to do my own thing, you already have developed some of the core pieces that allow you to be successful by yourself, because there will be another level that you'll step into that you didn't realize was all a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sometimes the hardest part, is like when someone's like, oh, I'm just going to do my own thing, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And it sounds good because they're good at their job that they had prior,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't realize all the other jobs they just put on their plate now because they have to do it,
Yeah.
And so that part of it is kind of a nuance that people forget about, but it's really just honing in and realizing kind of where you are and kind of elevating as that continue goes on. Obviously, new levels, new devils. They say it's a real thing in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, no problems don't get easier; they get more there's more of them, right? And so, and usually they're higher intensity. And so, one of the things you did say there, though, it's just like taking advantage of the situation that you're in right now. I think so many people are like, no, I'm just going to go start the company because I can't stand what's going on right now, or I don't know what else to do. I'm not going to go get a job. I'm just going to go start this. When they don't truly understand that, like, can take advantage of all the resources, they can take advantage of building up, funds and financial aspects to be able to go leap into entrepreneurship when it makes sense. And that was one thing that, like, I had the luxury of doing. I didn't plan it this way, but I went full-time in July 2020. I was planning on really January 2021, but the pandemic allowed me to do stuff a lot quicker. I had about 9 months worth of like savings, right? That I was like, all right, if I don't make a dime in 9 months, we just bought a house, which was not the smartest thing, but I'm like, all right, I can at least pay for all of what we need. And it was just my wife and I for 9 months. And if this doesn't happen, if this doesn't work, then I can go back and get another job in medical device sales. But so many people are like, man, no, I need to make this work in the first 60 days, 90 days, things like that. And they don't realize, like, I didn't pay myself for the first 9 months. It wasn't that there wasn't money in the business. Right. I invested into Apex 3 weeks after going full time. I started to see and look at things differently. And then, like, when I wanted to start paying myself, I was able to pay myself what I needed to do. And it's just kind of scaled from there. But so many people look at it the wrong way. And I'm sure you see it, obviously, in being in part of the Apex ecosystem, where it's like people wait to the last minute to invest into that program when it's like, okay, all of this other stuff is like out of whack. It's like, no, you need to proactively invest in yourself.
Dude, you just laid out some gems right there. Like, and I hope people didn't overlook that, because the sequence that you did that in is like the gold, right? Is because it wasn't like you just said, I didn't really pay myself for 9 months. And most people get into entrepreneurship to like, I'm going to make money.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a backwards mindset of like, no, I'm going to create a business that makes me money. And so the creating business part usually is the part at the beginning that's like generating everything, which is usually the investing more money away from you, not necessarily back in your pocket. And so we get it backwards and we get stuck. And that sequence really does matter. And because, I mean, like I said, I've seen it over and over and over again. And most people in entrepreneurship, when they first get into it, is like, cool, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to make $10,000. I'm going to keep 9. I'll probably put 1,000 here. And it's just like, it's going to take you forever to get to where you're trying to go, because you just took 90% of it and just, you know what I mean? So you're spot on with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, so coming from medical device sales, it was always just like going and hitting the number, and then when you hit this number, you get the extra bonus, you get all the stuff. So like my naiveness being a entrepreneur, I saw $10,000 I was doing in sales and revenue. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go full time with this. And then I'm like, okay, I can get it 15 to 20, not realizing, the taxes and the expenses and all the crap. And I'm like, where did all the money go? But that was part of the reason why it was like so crucial. And I tell people, like, literally to this day, because I've obviously seen people like come and go from Apex and all these other things. It's like, dude, I have lived and breathed what I've learned in that community, and I did it from an early going. So like, luckily and selfishly, I don't know anything different. So like, I've been building my machine for the last 3.5 years. I only didn't build my machine for the first 3 weeks of doing this full time, but I know a lot of people like wait, years and years and years, whether it's Apex or another group, to be able to do it. And it's just like, as you mentioned, going back to like the things you were doing as an athlete, and then you go to the outside world and you're like, oh my gosh, people don't do this. People don't post on social media. People tell people about their business. They don't have a referral like, you're like, oh my gosh, like this is kind of insane. But the reality is like less than 1% actually do it the way a lot of us do it.
Dude, it's so true. And it's crazy because you feel like it's out there and the information's there. But the reality is sometimes some people don't like doing they don't like facing the hard work and doing it, which is really not hard. You just have to be consistent at doing the simple things every day. Consistency, as you know, the higher level you get in sports, the only real separator is how consistently you can show up at your best. Like that literally is the only separator.
Yeah. So I have a kind of an out there question, different from what we've been talking about. Like, who was the person that you saw in professional sports where you're like, man, I probably wouldn't have anticipated like this guy just being not just who they are or whatever, right? But like having the work ethic, having like all this stuff that you're like, man, I probably wouldn't have thought of that person as somebody that like I truly look up to, but man, this guy is legit.
Yeah, so there's a couple people I think about. There's guys obviously that everybody has like before you even get to the sports to meet those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously the Michael Jordans, the Jerry Rices, all those guys. I used to watch like the 30 for 30s documentaries in high school because I just want to understand the mindset of these guys.
Yeah.
So that was always my thing. But when actual guys I played with and got around, and there was a ton of them. And I guess guys that I'm trying to think of guys that everybody would know now. Stephon Diggs, like he's obviously kind of doing a lot right now too.
Mm-hmm.
He'll work a lot, really hard. And people won't, because he's got like not say a flashy attitude, but he kind of has a little bit if you're around him.
Yep.
And he can be mistaken for not being a grinder. And he's in there. When I got in there, he was when I was leaving, like early, late, watched film all like he was definitely one. I'm trying to think of other guys on the platform. Obviously, I was there in New York with Eli Manning. Who else was like?
Were you at Texas? I saw you in Texas. Were you at Texas Tech when Holmes was there?
Yeah, I was just about to mention him too.
That's funny.
Yeah, he was there. We actually had 3 quarterbacks. So we had I had Baker Mayfield, I had Patrick Mahomes, and then if people know Davis Webb, which they were all 3 in the same. They were there all at the same time, 3 years in a row.
Crazy.
I mean, they were there, and then they all transferred out, obviously, and they all went to the NFL. I think 2 of them went obviously first picks. Yeah. And the other one went in the second round. So
crazy.
All the same time. It was wild. But he was a guy that was always in film. Obviously Kingsbury was there, and him used to be sitting film all morning, all night. And they used to be there too. So he's definitely one of those guys. He makes it look easy. He really does. Mm-hmm. But he does put in work a lot.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, man. And I think it's probably just cool for you to see like everybody's like, oh my gosh, Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield, all these guys, but you saw them like years ago putting in the work, doing the stuff that like now is just obviously way second nature for them, but knowing that like, hey, like no, this didn't happen overnight.
Mm-hmm. No, dude, it's cool too. Like one thing I did learn with that kind of caveat on that is like once you go into multiple different teams, you realize cultures are different too. Mm-hmm. Certain teams, I mean, you walk into and you're like, this is a winning culture. This is one that's not. You just kind of have some of those things, and obviously key players that are part of it. And so when I was with, actually, it was what year was that? I can't remember the year, but basically when Philly won the Super Bowl with I forget the guy's name, the head coach who just got there like 2 years prior. I went there for the first year, and then I got basically traded back to the Vikings. But when I first went there, I was like, this coach has it figured out. They're going to win. Watch. Years later, they win the Super Bowl. But like there's certain environments that have it when you have like every player that's on point and everything like that. They just got obviously Carson Wentz was just drafted that year, so I was there with him. And then they had somebody else that I forgot the running back they got. But but there was just certain things that all play a part of it. And it's an environment culture thing with hard work and focus. But yeah.
No, I think that culture thing is one thing that I've seen it obviously on both the good end and then the not so good end. And you can have the best players, you can have the best employees, you can have best all those things, but like it rises and falls on leadership. And that's one thing that I think people don't take and put enough stock into because they're so focused on all the other things, right? They're focused on the revenue, they're focused on the flashy stuff, they're focused on the things that everybody else looks at as successful, when if the culture is not there, if the people aren't bought into the vision, it doesn't really matter. And so one of the last questions before we kind of wrap everything up, how have you seen specifically like being around Apex of where you're like, man, not only is the culture there, but the vision for you as a sales rep and as one of those entrepreneurs, how has that played a role into your like, man, I'm all bought in, but I also see where I fit into the puzzle. So that way some of these entrepreneurs that are listening to this can understand the impact that getting people on the bus, the right people on the bus in the right seat can absolutely do for their business.
Yeah, I think the big thing too, and this is probably for the leader, is you have to have a vision that's big enough for everybody that's on the bus.
Mm-hmm.
Especially as you start getting high level people that you're recruiting to your team, because those guys have a bigger vision, right? And so as you do that, you can't have a vision for, let's just say a type B player, and then your vision can fit for them. But if you bring in an A player, his vision is beyond that B level status. And so he's going to feel capped. He's going to feel like there's no ascension plan. He's going to feel like, well, this is the best it's going to get. He's going to get bored. And so like, as a leader, you have to create a vision that's big enough for all the players that you have on your team. And as those B players develop, they're going to hopefully, as with your leadership, develop into A players. So you got to create that space that allows them to see, oh, like this is where we can go. It's not like we're capped right here and we're just trying to maintain and stay the same. So that leader spot needs to create a vision that is big enough for everybody, that motivates and that can fit in, that their vision can fit in the big vision, right? And so for all of the people that you're talking about that are on the bus, find somebody, and if you're already in that position, create and look to see and put your vision within that vision, right? And that's where I think it's so important, where obviously I go back to leader because you said it rises and falls on leadership, but like understanding where your people's vision are and helping them, because they may need help fitting their vision into the full vision that you have too. And when they can correlate that, they're way more bought in, because like, oh dude, I can do everything I need to do and hit my goals and everything I'm trying to go after my vision, all while at the same time helping hit the vision that you have on the team, right? And so as that understanding and correlating and connecting those dots is huge, right? Because same way, obviously, I mean, you can always go back to sports and do like anything, but you have to, once you realize, because clarity is everything, right? And if we're not clear on what we're going after and how that can fit in the confines of the environment that we're in currently, whether it be business or whatever, then we get this like gray area and we're like, I'll be bought in if I could, make more money. I'll be bought in if everybody's really nice to me. I'll be bought, like, you have all these like parameters that have to be perfect, instead of being like, no, like everything that I'm desiring, I can do. And then obviously the goal is like, oh, I can even go beyond that in this style, right? So I think it's really perspective, one, and then getting clarity on where it is. And then obviously as a leader, going back to them, is creating a vision that's big enough for everybody to fit in.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. A great way to end a really awesome episode, man. I really appreciate you coming on. That was great. I know I'm excited to go back and listen to this one because a ton of good nuggets, but I know a lot of people, especially just with your background and the enthusiasm and some of the stuff that you're doing, this is going to be great. So where can people stay connected with you online?
Yeah, obviously Facebook or Instagram. Obviously, I guess everybody's got like the check now, but
yeah,
my name, you can type it in there. Instagram is TSym, just like half of my last name. And then obviously Facebook's Taylor Symmank. I'm on both of those pretty much all the time for business and stuff too. So
yeah, awesome. Well, we'll put all that stuff in the show notes. Taylor, man, thank you so much for coming on.
Dude, it was a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, man. Looking forward to staying connected and seeing your journey take off as well. And thank you again to the audience for tuning in to today's podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, download, and share our content. Leaving a 5-star review goes a long way. We'll see y'all next week. And remember, entrepreneurs aren't born, they are brewed.
I'm an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs aren't born, they're brewed. Thank you for listening to Entrepreneur Podcast with your host, Adam McChesney.